We're going to chat for about 35 minutes, and then we'll open it up and take questions from our friendly audience. So welcome to Hartman. I'm delighted to be here with you tonight. And I want to start just with a question about your journey.
Absolutely.
And in particular, can you tell us a little bit more? I'm going to get 2 for 1 in this question about the organization you founded and you're running and how it's connected with that decade you spent at AIPAC.
Absolutely. I'll take you back even before that. But first of all, I want to thank you guys for the opportunity to speak with you all. Applaud your leadership, appreciate your leadership, play a critical role in your community and in this country. So it's great to be a part of an effort to keep you encouraged and inspired, because we need you. We need you. My life is really, it exists at the intersection of African American and Jewish interests. And I think the reason, it's a matter of almost destiny. Both of my parents were very involved in the civil rights movement. They were participants in the famous freedom rides. And one of the things that they made sure that I understood when I was growing up was that the civil rights movement succeeded, obviously because of the work that was done in the African American community, but they definitely wanted to make sure that I was mindful of the fact that there were people of conscience from other communities that got involved in that struggle in a very meaningful way. And my mother always described it. She said, chief among those were our brothers and sisters in the Jewish community who contributed time, talent, treasure, and even made the ultimate sacrifice so that African Americans can have freedom and self-determination in this country. My father was one of the first black students to integrate the University of Memphis. And he talked about when he was on campus that white students would literally sick German shepherds on him to chase him back and forth between class. And the only white friend that he had the entire time of his matriculation was a Jewish student from Brooklyn who had an apartment near the campus. He got an extra set of keys made, gave them to my father, and he said, what's mine is yours. So I grew up in a household where my parents made sure that I understood that there was a historic and significant relationship that has always existed between blacks and Jews. When I think about black people's 400-year plus sojourn here in the United States, there haven't been a lot of people lining up to be our allies, but if we had to look to one group that has consistently been there and answered the call, it's the Jewish community. And now that society has changed and African Americans are more economically empowered, more politically empowered, I believe in a concept called standing by the code, standing with the code. And what I mean by that is that you stand with those who stood with you. Now that we have a powerful voice in politics in the country, it's not a time for us to turn our back on those who helped us to achieve that voice. It's time for us to lean in. So I've always felt that blacks and Jews have a unique insight into man's potential for inhumanity to his fellow man. I think we play a leadership role within the human family as a result of our experiences. And when we see challenges arise on the horizon, we have a responsibility to really be in the leadership of pushing back against those efforts. So that really informed my worldview. So I had an opportunity, how I came to AIPAC, is that I had a leadership development group and an honor society for top performing HBCU students in Atlanta. And it was funny, AIPAC's college outreach program is very good. And they came to me, invited me to lunch, and said that they wanted to invite some of our students to come to AIPAC Policy Conference to learn about Israel and some of the existential threats that the nation was facing. So I remember going in, talking to 35 African American students, and I said, hey, I want to share something with you guys. I said, we got an outstanding opportunity to be able to travel to AIPAC, participate in a conference, and the organization that's inviting us is AIPAC. And I remember them reaching for their phones, and people trying to slyly Google. And I was like, no need to Google the acronym. That's the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. And that didn't do anything to make the quizzical looks go away. So I said, I said, this is a teachable moment. And I shared with them about the historic relationship between our two peoples. These 35 African American students for whom Israel was not a kitchen table issue traveled to policy conference, heard Obama speak on the day after he had secured the nomination in 2008, And these children weren't, not children, they'd kill me if they heard me call
Young
them
adults.
children. These young adults, these young adults then went back to the city of Atlanta after learning about Iran's drive for a nuclear weapon and lobbied their elected officials there and got the city of Atlanta to be one of the first major metropolitan areas to divest pension funds from companies that were supporting Iran's energy sector. So it was a demonstration of, again, rekindling that bond that exists between our two people. And it was recognition of the fact that if you're willing to reach out to a group of people, share things that are of paramount concern to you, and then listen to things that are of paramount concern to them as well, there's a powerful energy there that I think has consistently proven an ability to change things in our country and in our world for the better. So that is who I am in essence. And National Black Empowerment Council is the extension of that. The 400 plus people who I took to Israel when I worked at AIPAC now make up 99% of the membership of the National Black Empowerment Council. So when I was at AIPAC, support for Israel was the central organizing principle of the movement. And then we did things, obviously, as black leaders, which benefited the African American community. Now that I've started the National Black Empowerment Council, black empowerment is the central organizing principle, and we are still leading in the areas of black-Jewish relations in solidarity with Israel.
Okay, thank you. So in the American Jewish community, we spend a lot of time talking about leadership. It's one of the things we talk about here at Hartman, and there are a lot of competing models of leadership and programs for building leadership. And I'm curious if there is a parallel landscape in the African American community and how the Black Empowerment Council fits among other organizations.
Excellent question. Because one of the things that I did in the creation of my student program was I was at Clark Atlanta University. I was a speechwriter for the president, and I was thinking about the Jewish students who came down and got involved in the civil rights movement. And I was looking around, I was thinking to myself, where are the contingent of young black leaders who would engage themselves in a comparable struggle if the opportunity presented itself? So if you don't readily see it, then you have to create it. So that was the principle upon which that organization was founded. And then now that I'm working with, I have like 13 mayors who are part of our organization, 5 members of Congress, including the United States Senator, university presidents, partners in law firms. It's really grass tops black leadership in business, politics, academia, health tech, faith, philanthropy, law enforcement. And this contingent of leaders are doing things of paramount importance to advance African Americans. And they are actually leaning in a meaningful way in the area of black-Jewish relationships and support for Israel. And really, the years that I was at AIPAC, I got an opportunity to see how the organized Jewish community was going about outreach and the numerous programs which were created to develop that next contingent of leaders from the Jewish community who were really going to carry the mantle going forward, you know, like the Wexner Institute, things of that nature. So I really modeled National Black Empowerment Council on those types of groups. Like within YPO, which is the Young Presidents Organization, there's a contingent which is called Mosaic, which is largely Jewish. And then, as I said, the Wexner Foundation and organizations like that. And my hope is that in putting together this vast national network of black leaders in every major, mid-major city across the country, that we will be able to forge alliances between our cohorts and similar cohorts within the Jewish community going forward.
Fantastic, thank you. So we're really here tonight to talk about allyship,
Sure.
and you've already pointed us in that direction. Last winter, you published an article in Sapir where you argued that we should replace the idea of allyship with what you called convergence. And I'm hoping, could you define what you mean by convergence? And I'm also curious if we could get an update, how your thinking may have changed since you published the piece.
Sure. So when I was thinking about convergence, again, having been at AIPAC and seen, Federation, a whole host of very well-meaning Jewish organizations doing outreach to the African American community, having success and then also having some challenges. one of the things that I always was thinking to myself is that if these well-meaning Jewish organizations could actually be connected with people from our community that are going to approach the relationship in good faith and that are going to be consequential and impactful in moving the relationship forward, I can only imagine where we might be. Mm-hmm. So I felt in the creation of the National Black Empowerment Council to get these black leaders who are educationally, professionally accomplished in real positions that move the needle on behalf of black people. And they've all traveled to Israel. They've lobbied Congress on issues of paramount importance to Israel's security. And they're leaning in on the black-Jewish relationship that the Jewish community could find in our membership a group of black leaders for whom you could really build a consequential and impactful relationship because they have bona fides and understanding on issues that are of existential importance to the black community. And because the Jewish community has a long and demonstrated ability toward, or inclination toward reaching out to the black community, you could pull people together who could essentially get, and don't get mad at me for this, but who could essentially move beyond the dialogue industrial complex, okay? And who could really say, all right, you're in private equity, you're in real estate, you're in law enforcement, you are a Congress member. How can we triangulate our relationships and do things which are going to be consequential for both of our communities going forward? You know, there's nothing against conversations. Those conversations are very important. But I think the challenges that our country faces, that the black community and the Jewish community faces at this time, it's necessary for people who have moved beyond that and who are now ready to actually do things of real consequence to move the ball forward. One of the things I'm particularly proud of is that in the wake of October 7th, and then Israel's righteous and justified offensive to, rid the world of Hamas, there were a lot of people in cities across the country who were harassing the mayors who are parts of my organization to try to get them to call for a ceasefire resolutions and to try to get them to condemn Israel. Their councils, in many cases, were lobbying them to do it. But because they had real knowledge about what's happening in the region, they had real relationships in the Jewish community, and then they were part of a consequential network of black leaders who were their peers, who were standing with them in solidarity when they were taking these principled positions, these leaders pushed back. And I just think that at that time, because black political power in the United States is really concentrated in cities, okay? Particularly in the South. So the enemies of Israel, recognizing that, wanted to get these mayors to come out and condemn Israel as a way to build up more momentum towards whatever it was they wanted to try to do in the country. And I'm just very proud that a lot of those mayors pushed back on that, prevented that from happening.
I want to push a little bit more on Convergence as a new model.
Sure,
and what makes it different from allyship or a new stage in allyship?
Well, I'll tell you what, so our Convergence model, National Black Empowerment Council, we're facilitating connections between blacks and Jews at 3 consequential levels. So first of all, is at the level of organizational leadership, all right? Kanye West gets upset, fires off a tweet, okay? There's naturally going to be a response from the Jewish community, but an individual can make a statement and he can just be perceived as an individual. When organizations then come and make a statement, that is perceived as a more representative opinion of the larger community. So I felt like it was necessary in some of these critical situations for leaders within their respective organizations to be able to communicate with each other, to be able to back channel, to have sufficiently trusted relationships so that when these types of situations occur, maybe somebody from the African American community could say, give me 36 hours to try to reach out and to try to do what I can to mitigate this conversation before it escalates, because then once it escalates, it turns into something decidedly different. So one of the things that has happened, in particular around the conversations around DEI, So this is a gentleman that's a really good friend of mine. I don't want to name his name, but he's a gentleman who's a very good friend of mine. He leads a very significant Jewish organization. And he was writing an op-ed about DEI. Now, because of the years in which I've been engaged with the Jewish community, I understand what the Jewish community means when it talks about DEI, particularly in the way it's practiced at Columbia and a lot of these Ivy League institutions. It is a space which intentionally alienates the Jewish community and sets the Jewish community up in an adversarial stance against other people from marginalized communities, all right? For Black people, when you say the acronym DEI, we mental picture something entirely different, because we're a part of that coalition and we have no concept of what it would mean to be alienated from that. So that doesn't come to our mind. When we think about DEI, we think about the mechanisms which have been designed to help African Americans matriculate in education, corporate C-suites, and then also with government contracting and things which have helped build wealth in Black communities. So when the Jewish community was, Barry Weiss and other people were coming out and saying, we got to end DEI, I was like, let's pause a minute, because you're only going to get one opportunity to articulate this properly. And you understand what you mean when you say end DEI. But another group is not going to perceive it in that way. So we need to really think through how this is going to be communicated, because Black people are just reflexively going to hear it as an existential attack coming from an allied community. And if we can avoid that, let's avoid it. So we had a lot of conversations, and I saw some shifts, and I don't think that situation turned into the major conflagration that it could have been, thank God. And then also at the level of political leadership, there's a congresswoman who I took to Israel before she became a congresswoman by the name of Nikema Williams. Mm-hmm. She, along with Debbie Wasserman Schultz, they're like the Democratic co-chairs on the Black Jewish Coalition within the United States Congress. So they have a lot of conversations between themselves on federal issues, and it's great to have one of our leaders playing a significant role in that. And then also in the various cities that we live in, bringing together the cohorts from National Black Empowerment Council and the leaders in the Jewish community. And in a city like Atlanta, where the mayor is a part of our organization, congresswoman, former police chief, it's just a whole array of people who have consequential positions in the city of Atlanta. If there were ever any kind of major anti-Semitic action that were ever to take place in our city, the Jewish community would be pushing against an open door in terms of having Black leadership who would understand and who would be able to respond favorably. Like in the wake of October 7th, when the leaders of Hamas called for just a day, that Friday, where they called for the mayors of my organization, before the Federation even reached out to them, they already knew that it was going to be necessary for their local police to pick up patrols around synagogues and other sites of interest to the Jewish community during that particular time. And I was proud that the work that we had done had already conditioned them to just reflexively make those actions before they even had to be engaged. But, we used to say at AIPAC, you can't build AIPAC on the day that you need it. And in the Black-Jewish relationship, you can't build it on the day that you need it. You have to constantly be investing in it and building. So it's great to see it bear fruit when it's really necessary.
I agree. At the same time, so I'm from Chicago. I live just north of Chicago in Evanston.
Yeah, and your mayor did not support, your mayor signed on to a ceasefire resolution.
He did, and
he's not in our group.
I was going to guess. I admit I was assuming that at this point. But the Chicago Jewish community is very angry, thinks very poorly of him.
As do large sections of the African American community, too. Sorry to throw you off.
No, it's okay. I had this moment of, I feel like I should say good, but also, I don't want to say good to hatred and distrust, but
I understand.
it's good.
He has a lot of eyes on him. I'll just say that. From
And
a
you know
wide
what?
swath of Chicago.
And Chicago politics are a thing unto themselves, we
Yes,
should also
indeed.
certainly say. But I think in most of the American Jewish community that the experience of not having allies immediately after October 7th is the much more common, probably experience and certainly perception. I can tell you for the journal that I edit at one point, I was talking with a potential author, and the basis of her article was going to be, I had 10 texts from non-Jewish partners on October 8th. Here's why. And it was such a rare story that she could write 3,000 words about it. I think about her a lot. In the end, she didn't write because it was too emotional. But all of this is to say, despite or alongside the many successes that you've had in strengthening and rebuilding these relationships, what do you think is standing in the way? What's the biggest obstacle to rebuilding the relationship between Black Americans and Jewish Americans?
The media. So I had a conversation with my father. He's 84. And one of the things I try to study is mass psychology and things that influence mass psychology. So my dad, you know, I told you he was around in the early 1960s. So I asked him, I said, in advance of the civil rights movement, did you begin to see things on television or in the media which was kind of heralding that things were going to move in this direction? And he talked about Black entertainers being on the Ed Sullivan Show. He talked about certain other things which happened in the Sidney Poitier as an actor. Like there were certain things that were popping up in the mainstream media which were preparing people for a shift in the culture which was already destined to come, okay? Preordained to come. Think about once upon a time, people in America were adversely opposed to LGBT community. Any notions of that? Okay, that's a more recent example. Then you start to see Ellen, you start to see things happening on TV which conditioned the environment for a change which was necessary to come, okay? I feel like that wind which was at the back of the Black community and which was at the back of the LGBT community is now a gale force wind in the face of the Jewish community, okay? Because most folks from the African American community are watching MSNBC, they're watching CNN, and they're watching other similarly oriented news networks. Now, in the Black community, the Middle East is not a kitchen table issue, okay? We all understand how complicated those issues are. There's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of history, and it's something that you have had to pay attention to over time to really have command of the subject. Most people outside the Jewish community haven't dedicated themselves to that level of like understanding and awareness. So if you trust a news network on the issues that you feel are germane to your community, then by association, you're just gonna assume that they're telling the truth about everything else. And there is a decidedly anti-Israel bias in a lot of these networks, okay? And one of the things that I say when I talk to Jewish communities about my community as it relates to that, they call it television programming for a reason. It will program you over time. And it's almost as if, and this isn't to make any excuses, but this is almost to say, how can an average person for whom this is not a kitchen table issue land on any other point other than the point that they're being directed to by the media that they trust? Okay, but when you have individuals who had the opportunity to travel to Israel, when you had individuals who have meaningful relationships with the Jewish community and who have lived experiences which can refute a lot of that, that is where the basis of your alliance is going to be the strongest. But for everyone else, sadly, I mean, they are literally being led, almost propagandized into a position which is decidedly anti-Israel. And it's like until there is a compelling alternative worldview platformed in a way where people can receive it, we're going to face a lot of challenges. Because what ends up happening with my group is that these are leaders of consequence, so they have significant spheres of influence. And within their spheres of influence, people have conversations with them. and they correct the record. But, CNN is not going to put this on television.
Right.
Okay, so you have allies who are having critical conversations in a whole host of communities, but because it's not being platformed, it could easily lead one to conclude that you're in this entirely alone. But I feel that in large part, that sense of being alone is exacerbated by what you're getting from the media and the ways in which social media are algorithmed intentionally to, I think, make things more challenging for Israel and to make things more challenging for the Jewish people, sadly. And we had to do something about that.
Can we flip it around
Sure.
and ask, what would you want American Jews to do differently or to change about our typical patterns?
What I would say is the American Jewish community is perfectly justified in feeling that the world has kind of let them down or that people have turned their backs on the Jewish community. If I were in a similar circumstance, I probably would feel the exact same way. One of the things I would say, and you can take it for what it's worth, I would encourage the Jewish community to obviously take some time because a lot has happened, all right? But eventually, it's going to be necessary to re-engage with the world. Now, what you'll want to do is to have a curated group of leaders from other communities who are going to show up ready for the conversation. My organization does that. There are other organizations in other communities who have identified people who will be ready and inclined to help, rebuild and restructure the relationship going forward. But one of the things I always say is that God does not give any individual, God does not give any particular group a monopoly on wisdom. The benefit of the human family is interdependence and interconnection. It's when we talk to each other and we build that we often tend to manifest something greater and more impactful than if we just tried to do it entirely on our own. And one of the things I say, coming from my AIPAC background, is there, 6 million Jews in America? Somewhere in that area. And geographically, there's only a certain number of areas where you have, a sizable Jewish community. But if I were to get on a plane and fly to Los Angeles, about 3 hours, I'm gonna fly over parts of the country where there's no statistically significant Jewish community, all right? So from a political standpoint, evangelical Christians on the right, okay, you're not gonna get the Republican nomination to be president of the United States if evangelicals don't support you. Then on the other side, blacks, you're not gonna get the Democratic nomination to be president of the United States if black people don't support you, as Bernie Sanders, okay? So what's happening is that on the left, these very far left forces, some Democratic socialist forces, have identified my community as a new theater of operations. A new theater of operations to try to move the black community further and further to the left. And to therefore then eliminate that beachhead of moderate, sensible, solution-oriented, pro-black Jewish relations component within the African American community. So we're holding firm in that place. And to the degree to which we have other folks in the Jewish community who recognize our ability to try to preserve those relationships and who are helpful in our efforts, you should buy dinner. There's a whole lot of things that people can do, but these individuals just need to have touch points, friendships, relationships, because people think that politics is all about the amount of resources that you give to a candidate. And I'm not going to say that doesn't matter. Okay, but the years that I was at AIPAC, it was about people having personal relationships with their members of Congress. They knew his kids, they knew where he went to school, they knew where he went to church. They built meaningful relationships. They would call a member on their birthday. So that's why when I hear people say all these preposterous things about, the work that's being done over there and they're buying this and they're buying that, I'm like, you don't understand. And our organization, as a result of that, our mantra is life moves at the speed of relationships. So it's going to be necessary for the Jewish community to recognize the importance of relationships and to re-engage with those relationships at the appointed time.
It's really interesting. I hear you saying that there are partners, but they're not going to come all the way to where we are in our corner licking our wounds. We have to sort of take a step forward toward them. Is that fair?
Well, I don't want to necessarily say licking your wounds, but I think that a lot of people who are from my community who are very sensible and who are very aware of what has happened. I mean, we think about the current situation the Jewish community faces domestically and with the international community, and we shudder. Like, racism has been bad historically, all right? But as a black person, if I were to think about forces that were adversarial to my interest, if I was standing with my back against the wall, I know which direction the lion's share of that heat is coming from. Jewish community is unique in that you got it coming from both sides. And it's so disconcerting to see that. And it's like where once upon a time people wore the mask of objectivity, it's like they've just ripped it off. And it's just reached a whole nother level of like vitriol. And you're not the only people who see it. Other folks see it. And as black people, part of the main motivation why so many folks in my community are leaning in on that is obviously because of the historic relationship, but then thinking, my God, what must it be like to be in a situation in 2025 when the world is just really showing that level of like ugliness and vitriol. So you're not in it alone. And I just say again, at the appointed time, because a lot has happened, but at the appointed time when folks are ready to say, all right, let's get back out there, just know that you're going to have people from other communities that are going to be willing to answer the call.
Thank you. Yeah. I could see on people's faces that there was a lot of appreciation for your description of your understanding of our experience right now, which is frightening and just very disorienting and confusing. I want to talk about Israel.
Okay.
A lot of your work building Black-Jewish relationships and relations focuses on Israel.
I've been 30 times. I'm willing to bet that some people in the room haven't been 30 times. I love to say that because people are like, what? 30 times? Yeah, I've been 30 times.
It's a lot of airplane miles.
It's a lot of miles.
Yeah.
Delta.
Yeah, it is.
Delta.
So, well, Atlanta.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Anyway, I have a lot of thoughts about airplanes and airlines, but there's another parallel there with the Jewish community, which is we often use or have a history, especially in the last few decades, of using trips to Israel for community building, in both like local community building, but also building relationships between Israelis and American Jews. I actually looked it up. Over 900,000 Jewish young adults have gone on Birthright, right? 10-day free 10-day trips. We send adults on missions, all these different models. But right now, Israel is not a unifying topic for American Jews. There's a lot of internal disagreement and struggle around interpretation of the war and different events in the war, around the Israeli government. It just keeps going, the list. And I'm curious if you've run into that or how that has affected your work. And I'm going to tack on another question, which is, like, why Israel? Why not travel around the United States? You can throw in, go to Toronto as well, go to Montreal, and meet Jews who are here primarily. Why Israel?
Okay, so two answers. Now remind me, don't let me get away with not answering that second one, because that's really important. So just by way of example, so my daughter's 10 years old, all right? At the time we lived in DC, and when my wife was pregnant and we were going through all the visits with the doctor before the child was born, the doctor was Jewish, okay? So I worked at AIPAC and I was traveling to Israel. Now my wife is sophisticated. The minute she found out the doctor was Jewish, she didn't immediately say, my husband works for it. So you can't do that. You got to be more subtle. So she was waiting on an opportunity to just, mention my work and my solidarity. So it was a visit on the 9th month, and I wasn't able to make it because I was actually in Israel. I was on my way back, but I was in Israel, 9th month. I was on my way back. So the doctor was like, where's your husband? So then she was like, aha, this is my moment. All right? She's like, I get an opportunity to tell this doctor what my husband does. And she said, my husband, he's a strong supporter of U.S.-Israel relationship. He works for AIPAC. And then the doctor paused, and he was like, why would he want to do that? And when I tell you, my wife was crestfallen. Now, having done the work for a while, I realized no community is monolithic, okay? But my wife, that was her first encounter with that dynamic which exists within the Jewish community that there is not, nor would you expect there to be, but there's a significant section of the community that's just not a bedrock issue or value, and she was very surprised by that. In Congress, when we would lobby members of the Congressional Black Caucus, the AIPAC delegation would come in, and then, 2 days later, another delegation would come in, which would say the decidedly opposite thing of what it was that we had just said. So, for a lot of people who are not familiar with this dynamic, it's very confusing, okay? So even in the black community, we have some differences over issues, but on things that are existential like that, we tend not to have economic empowerment, voting. You're not really gonna find a lot of black folks that are this voting thing is overrated. So for us, there's a little bit of a disconnect to think about something that's supposed to be that essential, having that kind of variance of opinion. Now, why Israel? As I said earlier, the support the dynamics of the Middle East, it's not a kitchen table issue in the African American community, okay? Most black folks, unfortunately, 47 million black folks, about 6 million Jews. So most black people don't really know folks from the Jewish community in real meaningful ways. All right, so the idea, the construct, which is most commonly associated with anything Jewish that they most frequently encounter is Israel, okay? So when most people think about Israel, they think it's synonymous with all things Jewish. So if the media is telling you that Israel is just this terrible force in the world, and that's really all that you have to go by in the formation of your opinions about the Jewish community, I take people on my trip so that we can tackle it. Mm-hmm. Let's go right into the heart of this construct, which is truly what is at the heart of, I feel, alive anti-Semitism. Because most folks from outside the Jewish community don't have personal experiences with people in the Jewish community that they can point to and say, this is the reason why I feel the way that I feel. Most people are just constantly bombarded with these notions about Israel, which paint it in a negative light. So it's not until you actually have the opportunity, because nobody's going to platform alternative voices, you find leaders who have unimpeachable credibility in the black community on black issues. These are sophisticated, solution-oriented people who understand the importance of alliances and relationships. And then they travel to Israel, and they get an opportunity to learn about the politics, learn about the culture, learn about the values, learn about the security situation. And then those folks who have their hands on the reins of power and influence within the black community, because you can't take everybody, are the ones who then have those opinions and use their position to keep things from getting out of control.
It's interesting because there are models of dialogue that say, let's leave Israel outside, let's leave the Middle East outside.
I don't agree with that.
And you're exactly the opposite.
I don't agree with that. You have to confront it. You have to go right into it. But see, here's the thing, and I need people to have more faith. This sounds crazy, but I need people to have more faith in Israel, because Israel has a story that touches everybody if you highlight those aspects of Israel when folks travel there. I mean, Israel is truly a light unto the nations, okay? I take people on my trips. I've had some leaders who were originally born in Haiti, okay? One of the first things that they commended when they got to Israel, they commended Mashav on being one of the first groups to reach the island in the aftermath of that devastating earthquake.
Yeah.
Okay? I take African American leaders who have little to no knowledge about the plight of the Ethiopian Jews, and they go over there and meet Penina Tamanashato, who's in the Knesset, and she talks about how through the collaborative efforts of the North American Jewish community, the Israeli government, and Mossad, her entire family was airlifted
It's amazing.
out of certain death in Ethiopia to now freedom and self-determination in Israel. People need to know those stories. And you can read about it, or you can look across the table at Penina and see her tell you the story with tears in her eyes. And then black folks make the connection. They say, okay, wait a minute. The same Jewish people who played such a significant role in our freedom and self-determination are also the same people who've liberated these Africans and took them from a situation of certain death to freedom and prosperity and real self-determination in Israel. Okay, hold on. There's something about the Jewish people that I don't know. I need to learn more about it, because how they're being consistently portrayed to me in the media is in contradiction to these really life-affirming things that I'm seeing after having the real experience of being there. So that's why it's important. And again, I would not shy away from it. I mean, there are going to be aspects of it that may be controversial, but there are aspects of America that's controversial. But I feel, on balance, if you take people over there and you give them an opportunity to really learn, to hear some perspectives from the Israeli Arabs and other folks like that, consistently and without fail, when I bring my delegations back, folks are like, this was an absolutely transformative experience. It eradicated a lot of misconceptions that I had. Israel's not perfect. No nation's perfect, okay? But I am prepared now to move forward in my support for Israel and in my desire to build real bonds with the Jewish people.
It's interesting because in a way it gives us a sense, it allows the leaders who you're bringing, the black leaders, to be able to understand what an American Jew means when they say Israel.
Yeah.
Right, rather than talking past one another. I'm thinking about your example of DEI earlier. You mentioned anti-Semitism in the black community in passing, and in addition to the history of the civil rights movement and black-Jewish cooperation and working together at that time, there's also a history of a lot of animosity between our two communities, of anti-Semitism and of racism among white Jews. And I'm curious about the perception of Jews. We've talked about perception of Jews related to Israel, but perception of Jews as racist, of white Jews as racist among African Americans. And I'm also curious how often you would say you run into real anti-Semitism in the work that you're doing.
So one of the things that I say, again, because I'm going to be nothing but honest, yeah, there are issues. But I remember I was at a convening, some various Jewish organizations which are involved in fighting anti-Semitism. The Anti-Defamation League did a briefing, and they were talking about some of the results in terms of tracking anti-Semitism in other communities. They talked about the proliferation of anti-Semitic tropes. And one of the things they were saying is that within the black community, there's a strong belief in a lot of these tropes around like Jewish wealth and Jewish power. So they were just, they articulated the numbers and then they kind of left it at that. And I raised my hand. I was like, can I put a little context around that? And they were like, sure. And when black people are talking about Jewish wealth and the perception of Jewish power, is it a trope? It is, okay? But are these people doing it maliciously? No. Quite often it's admiration. Quite often it's a sense of, man, if our community were better organized, we probably would have a decidedly different experience here as well. So while it technically classifies as a trope, because it's the perpetuation of this notion of Jewish omnipotence and wealth, most black people that I'm talking to is coming from a place of admiration, okay? And I don't encounter animus. I encounter often ignorance, just in the sense of not knowing that there is a more effective way of communicating this admiration, of maybe not understanding the history of how what we perceive as admiration, other communities used as a mechanism to attack the Jewish people. So it may be a lack of understanding and a lack of sophistication in terms of articulating something that you actually admire, okay? Again, I don't think that the notion that black people are perceiving Jewish people to be racist. I've been doing this work since 2008. I do not encounter very many people in my community who come to me and just patently say, the Jewish community is very racist towards us. Okay? If anything, I will hear people say there's a lack of relationship, or there's a lack of engagement, or there perceives to be, there's little to no interest in things that are confronting us as a people. But I'm like, that's essential. The Jewish community would say the same thing. Right. Like, nobody cares about what we're going through. So I just encounter an expanse between where most black people are and where most Jews are. And I think that can be solved by relationship. I don't think that the damage is irreparable. I think that there are agent provocateurs from within my community who recognize sensitivities that blacks have around these notions of us being disenfranchised. And to say you're disenfranchised, that's kind of amorphous. You need to be able to point to somebody and say, this person is responsible. And I think that irresponsible leaders in my community have chosen to point to the Jewish community rather than to paint a larger picture about systemic issues and government, which is difficult for people to conceptualize. So you just point and say, that's your problem. It's an oversimplification, and I think that that has grown in a lot of instances. But I think where black people see genuine partnership between our communities, when they get an opportunity to really engage with people and see just the spirit that's on most Jewish people, which is like, how can we help? How can we empower? How can we, when people engage with that, they're like, oh man, most people are kind of mortified by a lot of the notions that they once held before they actually engaged in the relationship.
Thank you. I have more questions, but it's time to open it up. Do we have microphones? All right. So why don't we start over here in the back, in the third row?
First of all,
No.
hello? Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Wonderful.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for coming out. This is fascinating and just a revelation to me to hear you talk, and first of all, to know about the work that you do, which is really fantastic.
Appreciate that.
So here's my question. The prevailing view in our society is that Jews are white and that Arabs are people of color, like African Americans, Latinos, and others. Do you agree with that statement? Do you see that that's just simply a fact? Or is it that that's something that's subject to debate and discussion? And how do you talk about it with people in the black community?
Yeah, that's always been an area where I kind of defer to some of my Jewish colleagues when that question would come up on my Israel trips, because there is, it's confusion, I mean, is it a race? Is it a religion? It's confusing. I've even had conversations with people from the Jewish community, and they're kind of like, well, I'm like, well, if y'all can't understand it, how do you expect us to understand it, Yeah. But I think the prevailing sentiment in the African American community, particularly when we look at the history of the Jewish people here and around the world, is that people who are commonly perceived as white have treated people who are Jewish in a way which is not consistent with the way they treat their own. So there is a recognition that while people may be Caucasian, there is a difference between how the majority seems to treat the Jewish people. And while the hue of the skin may be similar, there's enough there that most people are like, something There's something
There's a
is
difference
something
that
is
matters.
amiss. There's
Yeah.
a difference, and that matters. Okay, and we've seen more than enough examples of Jewish persecution and Jewish marginalization for us to be able to say, all right, we may look different, but in this grand scheme of things, we got a lot more in common than which ultimately divides us. But that is a point of confusion within the African American community about are Jews white, it's challenging. Was there another part to your question?
Yeah, I was just asking because it's a little more challenging to say this, but I mean, I imagine.
Come on, man, shoot.
Certainly are
Yeah, let's go.
aware. Okay, I got my microphone back.
Yeah.
Here we go. All right, there's a long history of racism in the Arab world.
Oh, absolutely.
In Africa, and the
Absolutely.
way that Black Africans are perceived, and like
Absolutely.
even what's going on actively now in Darfur and other places.
Absolutely.
So, is there is that something you talk about in
There is.
the Black community? And
Yeah.
how do you talk about it?
Well, I do it all the time. So, like, one of the things I say when so here's what happens. And I think it's part of the reason why the forces that are antagonistic towards Israel, their movement seems to grow at like a faster rate than those who are favorable to Israel seems to grow. So imagine this, man. So imagine I'm holding up a picture, and on this front side of the picture, I have an unarmed African-American man, and he's standing across from a white police officer, and they appear to be arguing about something, and it's intense, okay? Black person sees that image, immediately takes umbrage to it. It's almost if in that exact same moment, they turn it around, and on the other side, you have an IDF soldier who's Ashkenazi, and then you have a Palestinian. He has a hue to his skin. What does that do? We project our historical experience into that image, okay? The circumstances are entirely different, okay? But it's the transference of emotion because of the hue to a particular group's skin, okay? One of the things that I always try to make sure that my group understands is that in America, during the civil rights movement, the way Dr. King and other African-American leadership comported themselves during the civil rights movement, exercising moral authority, nonviolence, making compelling arguments, which eventually carry the day, is why we succeeded, okay? What's happening with Hamas and Islamic Jihad and the terrorism and all these that's a false equivalency. And it's actually offensive. One of the things I say in those moments when people are coming to that moment of recognition is I say Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus, but she didn't blow up the bus, okay? And when people begin to recognize that there is a fundamental difference in how we went about articulating our grievances, folks are like, don't equate us with that. Dr. King never would have condoned blowing up shops and restaurants and all the things that you've seen happen from those leaders in Gaza. And it's highly objectionable to try to create that equivalency. And then one of the things that I'll say, people are fond of looking on television and seeing these Arab leaders, Saudi leaders with solid gold Benzes and all the luxury they live in. I could go to a number of historically Black colleges and universities or sites of interest in the African American community, and a Jewish surname would be attached to that building. Okay? There's a long-standing traditions of philanthropy that's come from the Jewish community. The creation of the Civil Rights Movement, the Urban League, the Rosenwald schools, 5,000 schools, which helped Black folks. There's a long history. I'm like, where is the Mohammed bin Salman Student Center on damn, I'm sure I said that on TV. No, babe, I'm joking. But I'm like, where is that same sense of solidarity from this other community? It's like, you have a hue to your skin like I do, but I am not just going to, because of that, turn off my capacity for critical thinking and then just disenfranchise a historic ally because our complexions are a little bit more similar. So it's deeper than they believe we acknowledge it to be.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to make an adjustment, and we'll do 2 questions, and then I'll let you answer just so we can get in a little bit more before we
I'm in no
call it a
rush.
night. Folks have been here since what time
Oh,
this
yeah,
morning?
y'all are in a rush.
So it's been a long day, and I know everybody is planning to be back tomorrow. So why don't we take one from this side? If there are questions over here. You're going to let the other side of the room take over?
Can I send my congregants on their next trip to Israel with you?
I don't know if my magic will work. I don't know. I'll do my best.
Okay, there's one more question there.
One of my greatest allies in my community since October 7th is a black minister at a nearby church. We've actually gotten very, very close since George Floyd's murder when we initiated a shared Juneteenth experience in our community. And so we really laid the relational groundwork before any of this hit the fan. Are you looking for new leaders in your organization to tap into, and or would you come out to different communities to speak?
Absolutely.
Or connect us with
Absolutely.
other leaders in your organization, et cetera,
Absolutely.
et cetera. But I just want to say how grateful I am to that partnership and that friendship that I have with this pastor.
No, I mean, so the overwhelming majority of the people in the organization are political, business, legal leadership. But now we're going to move more into faith-based communities. We just recently did an initiative in the city of Detroit. It's called a Lift Every Voice and Vote initiative, and to encourage more significant African-American voter representation in a lot of these elections, we have targeted the faith community. And are you guys familiar when they had the Jamal Bowman race here? And the turnout in the Jewish community was very significant. And there was actually the work that was done in the synagogues. Obviously, you're probably familiar with that. But there was an app that was used. There's a relational organizing app which gave captains within the synagogues the opportunity to be able to know within the congregation who all was registered to vote, who all had come out to vote, and through the technology, you could hold people accountable. Somebody could say, like Thomas could say, yeah, Darius, I got my absentee ballot. And I could say, oh, Thomas, no, you don't. Thomas, don't try it. But because of that, you had some synagogues which had up to 80% of voter participation. So we piloted it in the city of Detroit with the faith community. Because again, the faith community, that's your value-based voters, that's your family-first voters, that's your solution-oriented, not really prone to extremism element within the black electorate. So the project was successful. We got folks to turn out in a mayoral primary at 2 to 3 times the rest of the larger population. So we think that there's real promise there because we want to help mobilize that constituency within the larger African-American community, because you heard me mention theater operations earlier. So if there's not something happening within the electorate which can serve as a balance against that extremism, you're gonna have a lot of a problem. And then I just think that, the faith leaders in the African-American community, when I was at AIPAC and we used to take those leaders on their trips, they were really profoundly impacted, not just because of the religious elements of it, but then also the ability to be educated on what's really happening in the region. And those were leaders who often came back and just took their advocacy to another level. So very important element within the black community.
Okay, we'll take one more question from this side, and then we'll close.
As you're speaking about political leaders, especially I'm thinking Michigan with Ilhan Omar, that historically the African American community has been democratic. Are you also encouraging people within your organization to rise up and run for office that are both social liberalists, but also Zionists?
So within our organization, we have Republicans and we have Democrats. My belief is that wherever there are critical conversations that are happening that are going to impact the welfare of the African American community, we need a seat at all those tables, okay? So while my Democrats and my Republicans, they play partisan politics on TV, that's what they have to do. You put the jersey on. When the camera comes on, you got to do what you got to do. But when we're actually together and we're talking about the problems that face our people, we're just trying to figure out how to triangulate relationships in order to get things done. The vast majority of people who now hold these offices didn't hold those offices when they went on the trip to Israel. And we really, in our net, we created our own tribe. And it's like, we support each other's candidates, we support each other's businesses. Been 7 marriages that have happened within the larger group. There's some little kids running around as a result of, these trips. But it's a growing contingent of leaders within the African American community for whom support for the Black-Jewish relationships in Israel is a bedrock value. So, folks are going to continue to run. And one of the things that we have done in a couple of seats where you've had people who are in elected office from Black districts and who tend not to be supportive of Black-Jewish relations, we've often found that these leaders are also very divergent from how they champion bedrock issues for Black communities. So you have Black people care about safety, we care about jobs, we care about access to capital, we care about being able to put our kids in schools that are going to help them achieve their potential. And there are a number of elected officials who hold some of these seats who are a part of a particular party or wing of the Democratic Party, I don't want to name it, but those folks tend to be antagonistic to both of our interests. So anything that we can do to identify, to empower, and to mobilize people who can run and hold office and do it in a way which empowers the Black community and stays true to our bedrock values, we're going to continue to do that. I try to give political answers as I'm okay.
Amazing. What a beautiful way to end the conversation. I want to thank you so much, Darius.
Absolutely.
So grateful to have you as a part of this conversation. You really brought us to a place where I think a lot of us have had our minds, certainly the last 2 years, and to be in conversation with you, to elevate the conversation to this level, to talk about what partnership means, connectedness, convergence. So grateful for your wisdom, your thoughtfulness, your willingness to be in this conversation with all of us. Thank you to Claire for ushering us through this evening. And so grateful to all of you for being such active listeners and engaged. I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow morning. Thank you for being here. Good night.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.